Sweet. She's the Washington bureau chief for the Chicago Sun-Times. Alberto Avendano is the executive editor of El Tiempo Latino, a Spanish-language publication affiliated with the Washington Post. And also with us is the chief United States correspondent for the French newspaper Le Figaro, Laure Mandeville. Thanks to all of you for joining us.
Thank you.
Lynn, I want to start with you. We are just over a year away from the election. What is the state of play right now? I mean, regardless of those numbers we heard from Jim Spellman there, who's got the momentum? Who hasn't on both parties?
Well, so your listeners know, as Jim pointed out, these are distinct elections, separate storylines, and they happen in stages in the United States. We have 50 states, 50 mini elections that get us a nominee. The ones that are most important are the ones at the beginning, and those are in the states of New Hampshire and Iowa. Right now, Donald Trump has this lead. The story that we're waiting, that is unfolding, is whether or not with this kind of reality TV show type of campaign he has, where he is wildly popular with a segment of Republican voters, whether he could hold on to this. We're watching Jeb Bush, the son and the brother of a United States president. He's not doing as well as people thought. We're watching that. And then the big story on the Democratic side is whether or not, as Jim said, Joe Biden gets in. But what you have here is really a referendum in some ways on both parties on President Barack Obama. What would Hillary Clinton do different, even though she worked for him? And on the Republican side, it seems to be in some ways a race to repudiate the president's programs and legislative accomplishments. But what these candidates would do to replace them aren't clear yet.
Right, and these are party members that will nominate these candidates?
No. The way the elections work, and again, I'm going to try and make it simple for everybody out there, is everybody gets to vote in these primaries. You have to pick one side or the other. Each state has different rules, 50 states, different rules, great country. So you pick one side or the other when you go to this first vote. And they take place way before the summer nominating conventions. Everybody who's a registered voter can go vote. But you can't vote in both parties. You either vote to pick a Democratic nominee or a Republican nominee, or we have some other parties in the United States, they're just not as well known.
Right. Laure, these are very early days. We're only in the primaries right now. But to what extent are foreign issues playing out in this election? I mean, there are some very big developments around the world right now. We've got the Syrian crisis, we've got Ukraine, we've got Afghanistan. Are we hearing about this at all?
I think we are in a way, because I think the message the American people are sending to Washington is that they are extremely worried. They are disgusted by the way politics work in this town. You know, the money, the insiders, the paralysis also of power, you know, the paralysis of Congress, the inability to pass, you know, laws which everyone has been talking about for many years. And so, and their approach is an anti-establishment rebellion, but it is about foreign affairs. Why? It is about foreign affairs because people are worried about what's going on in the world. They see an America which doesn't control the processes in the Middle East. It's a huge mess, you know, it's, I would say, a kind of geopolitical disaster for America and the United States and the West in general. The situation in Europe is extremely, you know, worrying because Russia has started a war, changed the rules of the game, you know, broke international law in Ukraine, invading it in a sort of stealthy way, you know, different ways of hybrid war. And all of that creates sort of a huge anxiety, I think, in America. And people have the feeling that they don't control anything anymore. You know, there is this global world which is having an impact inside the country. You know, there is the trade that they see as a threat. We're talking about that. They see, you know, Islamic jihadists being arrested throughout the country, young Americans being recruited online. I mean, all of this create this kind of anxiety. And that's why, you know, when Trump says, I'm going to build up a wall, they just want to believe him. I think they don't really do, actually, but it's like, you know, searching for some kind of magical recipe. They know it doesn't exist, but they're so worried and so disgusted that that's what they are seeing now.
Alberto, let's talk about the Hispanic vote. That's a very, very significant, important vote here in the United States. In 2008, President Obama got that vote. It rode him all the way to the White House. Are there any indications at this very early stage where that vote's going?
Well, this is the greatest democratic show on earth, or one of the greatest. And in this country, probably more than any other country in the world, demography is destiny. And if a party does not understand how every nation transforms itself, reinvents itself with the arrival of newcomers, and with the arrival of new babies, and with the growth of new cultures within the culture, then that party is doomed. You cannot win an election, and this is something that we have learned throughout these modern years. You cannot win an election in the United States of America without a good percentage of the Hispanic vote. Mind, the Republicans know that they do not need 67%, as President Obama got. They need at least 40-some%. Their hope would be on a Bush, because George W. got that percentage. Before him, Reagan got that percentage. And that tells you that in tight elections, in tight states, you are going to win that state. I think that understanding the nation is something that the GOP has lost track of. Trying to feed the fear of the newcomer, of the new America, of the new demography, is something that is real, it's out there. But at the same time, I was reading a Pew Research Center report the other day. Well, we are not worse than in the past. Immigrants in this nation are incorporating into society, are assimilating, which is a word that I don't like, at a good pace, and as well as any time in history. So there is not a crisis unless you want to fabricate a crisis to exacerbate certain primary instincts in the voters.
Lynn, so much of these election campaigns right now are being driven by events on the ground, things that are taking place right now. We have the Trans-Pacific Partnership. It's a controversial agreement. Negotiators have agreed on it. We wait now on Congress to see whether they will approve that. To what extent is that factoring into the election?
It's all politics all the time, because we're so close to the presidential first kickoff vote in Iowa and then New Hampshire. So again, so people know what we're talking about. It's a trade pact. It is up for an up or down vote. You can't amend it because all the other countries then wouldn't necessarily sign on. It barely got through Congress. Very few Democrats voted for it in Congress. So the president has problems with his own party. There's no presidential candidate that has endorsed it yet from either party. I guess the only good news for the Obama White House is that he's got time to try and work it as an issue. It will be a factor, but it's one of many factors. And I think for the Democrats now, remember, we're talking about the party of Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders is definitely against it. So I think in terms of solidifying his base, that helps.
Laure, as Lynn points out, no presidential candidate has expressed open endorsement for this agreement, the TPP as it's known. Hillary Clinton was a strong supporter of the TPP when she was Secretary of State. Exactly. She has not endorsed it. Exactly. Is that likely to change?
I think she's really hesitating because, you know, what strikes me as a French person is that the trade issues in France, you know, are very big. I mean, there is a negotiation, as you know, which is the parallel of TPP, which is going on between Europe and the US, which is TTIP. And TTIP is very controversial in Europe, and particularly in France. And you have a huge bulk of the electorate on the right and on the extreme left, on the extreme right and the extreme left, who are voicing, you know, anger and opposition and hostility. And for me, it was very interesting because they want protection, they want protectionists, they want barriers, and they are very afraid, you know, that jobs are going to continue to leave. And I think in the US, it's the same, and it's new because the US is much more traditionally, you know, in terms of trade, not as protectionist as France would be, I would say. And so it's a new trend. It's a serious one, when you see that Sanders, is really going for it, and that Hillary, who was such, her husband was a big free trade person, and she was when she was in the administration. So I think it's extremely interesting, and it sort of brings us back to what I was saying earlier about this need for protection, this sort of feel that we are under threat. And who is going to protect us? Is it going to be the nation state? Is it going to be a new president, a new government?
Right. When we talk about the TPP, we often hear about jobs, and then the fact that jobs may be exported to other countries. We're also hearing about the fact that the United States jurisdiction will be extended to other countries in this agreement. We don't know too much about it because we don't know too much about this agreement right now. Alberto, do you think as we get to know more about it, it's going to become a bigger issue?
No, I don't have a crystal ball. I have no idea. What I do see is, and I want to bring this to the turf of the Hispanic vote and Hispanic mind. Latin America looks very deeply to the United States in everything that is trade. Clinton was the president of NAFTA, of the free trade with Mexico. Well, from the left, there has been always vociferous voices against this kind of trade issues because unions talking about inequalities and environmental issues and all that. So from a Hispanic perspective, if I may, it is interesting because Latin America wants these kind of agreements. They want to be integrated within the hemisphere. The Pacific issue has, number one, it is more complex in its extension. There is also a subtext with the relationship with China. So it gets sophisticated as we talk about it, and then we are going to hear a lot of partisan voices when this issue comes to Congress.
Okay.